With the on-track event to the FV4005, there's probably no better time to actually review the tank itself, and that's exactly what today's video is going to do, so stay tuned and we will be showcasing what this high caliber beast is like at tier 10. And of course you can see all of the gameplay in the background. We've got two gameplays in today's review, one that is kind of showcasing the carrying capacity and one that showcases just the pure more damage category that this thing can dish out in very easy fashion. So the first one is of course the damage capacity. We're going to showcase how much damage can this thing rack up pretty easily in a match where maybe it didn't go all too well. You can still have fantastic games, and you're going to see that within this replay. Now, nonetheless, we have the FV4005. I've had it for a long time. I decided to 3-mark it ages ago. I think probably about a year ago now that I managed to 3-mark this thing. And it is amazing to all intents and purposes. You are able to just completely shut down. It is a very good tank for players that maybe play more exclusively on their own. If you're playing in a platoon, don't get me wrong, this thing's amazing as well, but the key thing is that you are kind of limited by how much damage you can do if you're going in the same positions that your teammates might be or your platoon mates, and so maybe you end up with a little bit of a disappointing game at the end, even though you did absolutely nothing wrong. Yes, you will probably win a lot more if you have platoon mates, but it means that you won't be getting the high damage results as often, or at least that's what I found when I'm platooning up with friends that are of a similar sort of skill level. So you're kind of sharing out the damage, and that typically happens when you do platoon up, but you increase your win rate, so there's kind of that negative to actually jumping up in a platoon. Now, what does this tank offer? Well, you saw on the Type 5 just a second ago that you can pick up 1300 damage in one singular shot, and actually if you're loading the Hesh rounds you can actually pick up 1450 on average. So we actually low rolled on the Type 5 there, which was not really a problem because we still picked up a lot of damage so easily and we didn't really have to do anything about it. Now we go for a bit of a kind of preemptive shot on the J Panther there, but that was something you should not be doing in the FV4005. It does not do well at all if you are not fully aiming, and so what should you do? You should fully aim. That's because the dispersion of the vehicle and also the accuracy of the vehicle on this huge 183mm tank is probably not the best that you've ever seen, and so you end up bouncing or you end up missing because you weren't aiming 100%. Now with the Hesh round, as you just saw there on the Fortress, probably should have penned him. If I actually just loaded AP I would have been able to do that. On this tank we are using the advanced loading system, so you can swap between the rounds without negating your kind of the negative characteristics of reloading. You've then got the T124 that crops up to our left, and we use that Hesh round, which has lower penetration, but definitely enough to go through a lot of tanks' weak points. If you're looking at tier 10s, the AP rounds typically can go through everywhere on the front of pretty much any tank that you come up against, so you really don't typically bounce with them unless you kind of aim incorrectly or you do get unlucky slightly. That's kind of how they work. Now, you see in here that this tank does have a 20-second reload, and obviously when you're a massive box, and I mean this thing is absolutely gigantic, you were able to take a ton of shells in this thing without bouncing a single one, and that is typically why the FV4005 gets targeted by artillery, because you have no armour and you're not going to be able to bounce anything. And also anyone that comes across this can also load HE, which typically happens, and then you end up getting absolutely pummeled by both HE and artillery, and then you can get taken out very quickly. But regardless of that, this tank is absolutely beastly. I love playing this vehicle. It is one of the more kind of infamous vehicles of World of Tanks. Of course, if you've seen the FV215B183, this is the armoured slash slower slash kind of, in my opinion, worse version of the FV4005. It's kind of one of those, I just don't like the FV215B183. We will do a full review of that tank at a later date, maybe when the on-track event for that vehicle comes on, but essentially I prefer this one. It's a little bit more flexible, and typically on World of Tanks I prefer flexibility over just being able to sheerly kind of jump in and play it with a slightly higher alpha, or maybe you have slightly better armour. Typically armour doesn't usually work on World of Tanks, at least on World of Tanks console. Armour doesn't actually mean much, so there's always that. Now you can see the game's going terribly. This is usually the game that you do the best in, is when you have a kind of terrible team, and that's because you've got loads of people advancing towards you. They're typically on lower hit points because they've been advancing for the whole game, and so you can do things like just shutting down them as they're coming towards you. Now, yes, you typically will lose the game because you don't have the alpha damage to consistently be punching out, or at least the damage per minute to be able to punching out this all of the time, since you're limited to that kind of 20-second interval between the absolute boomsticks that you can release. And you can see here, when you're having to deal 400 damage, it kind of limits this tank very much. And so yes, you could have potentially done a hell of a lot more damage, but you're having to shoot at things that only have 400 hit points left, and that's where this tank becomes a lot more painful to actually play. Now, we could have hit the Conqueror. We've got a Type 5 Heavy that's now advancing, and yes, just purely because it's a Type 5 Heavy, we want to get it out of the game. That thing can ruin our day because yes, we have 1700 hit points, but if artillery manages to hit us, or the Type 5, talking about artillery pieces, a great round by the artillery, unfortunately, into the back of our tank and taking away, like, what, 3/4 of our hit points? Well, less than that. About half of our hit points in one shell. We get hit by 2 tanks over there. Having picked up 6,000 damage, we place a nice round into the Type 5. Unfortunately, goes into his gun, which is probably the worst place you could hit a Type 5, since we're only going to splash him, and hence why we only did 200 damage. With the FE 4005 and the FE 215B183, these high caliber rounds with the Hesh, you can splash people for like 500 damage even if you don't manage to pen. So often if you're coming up against those heavier tanks, or tanks that are just in the most annoying position possible, you can still hit them with the kind of Hesh round and still deal a decent amount of damage. Now the Scorpion G tries running away, and we'll move over to when the game actually ends here, which is currently right now, so we won't bother skipping. But you can see what this tank does well at, you know, even in a loss where maybe I didn't play 100% the best I could have done. We missed a few shots in that replay, but we still picked up 6,000 damage, which is typically what this tank can do in like a fairly average game. You don't have to do all too well, and we've taken out 5 enemies with this vehicle as well, so it's a very good damage dealer. Of course, when you have such high alpha, you only have to deal a couple of shots, so making sure you're in the right places basically is what this tank is all about. So let's look at the other replay where you may have to carry slightly in this vehicle and whether that's possible. So here we are on Westfield, one of my more favoured maps, and this is probably a more interesting kind of map that you'll be able to see some carrying capacity of the FV, albeit it is kind of limited with this vehicle since you do have that long reload, which makes it difficult for you to be able to have an impact continuously throughout the battle. But that's where making sure your positioning is on point. If you know where you need to be in World of Tanks console, then this vehicle will be insane for you. You would definitely be able to make this thing work, because essentially you've got 20 seconds where you need to make sure that you're moving to a different position or making some other impact in the game, where maybe you don't have to YOLO into people, you don't have to be sniping way at the back. You can play it as more of a role where you can jump in, you can do sorts of damage, well, a bit of damage when you need to. You can even impact the game by just taking little chunks off of some vehicles that you know are going to be a pain for your team. And ultimately, one of my favourite things about these high alpha damage tanks in World of Tanks is that you are able to splash out that damage really in a short burst, which stops the YOLO wagons that come into you. And like probably 90% of games you see a YOLO wagon maybe not coming towards you, but you can really punish them with this vehicle, which is what I absolutely love. I find it so annoying when vehicles just decide, you know what, I'm in a light tank, I'm just going to YOLO straight through the middle and I'm going to take out the artillery, because that is a really useful and effective way of like using your light tank at the beginning of the game, and then you just shut them down with this vehicle, since most of the light tank hit points are probably in the region of what you see here, and even if they're not, even some of the lower tier mediums like that Type 59-2 can get removed very easily as well, since you have the high penetration on your HESH rounds. They're not like terrible, which means that you can pen most things with them as long as you're aiming correctly, or at least aiming to some degree. And so yeah, I really enjoy this vehicle from that standpoint. Of course, if you picked up this vehicle or you play against it, I'm sure many of you know that there is a bit of a weak point, and you know, we've talked about it before. The armor model's terrible, this thing's huge. They're kind of the main weak points of the vehicle. You're not going to be able to bounce anything, and so you have to play it very much kind of thoughtfully, and you can't just do things that maybe some of the other vehicles can, which makes it somewhat inflexible when you're trying to come into carrying situations and you're trying to push yourself and really output damage more consistently. Maybe if you're going for your damage percentage marks of excellence, or maybe you're just trying to kind of improve as a World of Tanks player and just get better. Maybe this tank isn't necessarily the best for trying to do everything like that. Now, I go for the shot on the Skoda. I don't know if I was going to hit him, but I didn't bother loading the AP round because I don't know, probably laziness or something, but I did note that it was a barrier in between me and the Skoda T50, which means with these HESH rounds you cannot break down things. Like they explode on impact, so that means if there is something in between you and a vehicle that an AP round will be able to go through, a HESH round will not. So it will explode on whatever it is, which is why we weren't able to actually hit the Skoda there, even though there was no hard cover in between him and me, which is kind of a problem. Now we go for an absolutely atrocious shot on the T54 lightweight. Don't know why I even bothered firing there. Maybe due to lag, I don't know. But yeah, definitely don't be going out of your way to just take pot shots in this vehicle, because they don't work. You're playing in a predominantly a glass cannon TD, and if you fire preemptively, you miss or you don't deal damage, you can end up actually severely negating your kind of impact in the game, and that is definitely not what you want. What you do want, however, is taking away probably one of the more annoying threats in the game, at least for the FV4005, and that is the Sturm Tiger. Removing that from the game, the potential of being one shot is always quite nice. Now there's an ISM sat over there, don't quite know how the team haven't actually taken him out quite yet, but regardless, it's a very tight game in this replay, and that's where the FE kind of comes in clutch, because towards the end of the game this vehicle becomes super dangerous and can be really decisive if left alive, which is where the opponent's team need to come in. They need to get rid of this vehicle, because even if you don't pen, or even if you don't manage to deal a lot of consistent damage with this tank, because of such high alpha damage and because of the fact you can splash people for like 400, 500, at the end of the game people are typically on a lower amount of hit points, which allows you to, regardless of whether you pen or whatever, can still take them out, which is something that can really become super critical in the game, and why you're able to do a lot more damage than you'd probably expect. Now the Barat manages to actually spot us even though he's around, but the FB4005 on our team, the alternative one, manages to ammo rack him, which is lovely. Absolutely love seeing a little ammo rack. Not that it mattered because he was only on 300 damage, but it's always a little visual regardless. But you can see over here the enemy team kind of pressed up. The Object 268 gets spotted. That's a tank that we would gladly take a nice 1400 damage roll into, and he will be gone from the game if the FV on our team does hit him, and of course he does. And that is the Object 268 out in 2 shells, and that is why even when vehicles have preserved their health or camped for the entire game against this vehicle, you can still take their hit points away in such an easy fashion. That's why it's so dangerous, not only purely because it can do so much alpha, but because it can remove certain tanks from doing any plays towards the end of the game. That's why it's a very good stronghold tank, a tank that just blocks people from doing certain things in the later stages. Because if you take, for example, a medium tank that does 400 alpha damage per shot, if, for example, there's a tank on, he's taken half of the damage on his tank, he has 2,000 standard hit points, goes down to 1,000 hit points at the end of the game, he can take a shot from that medium to get into a superior position, which means that, yes, he will be able to then advance a flank or be able to do something. He'll just receive that 400 damage hit, take him down to 600, and then he can progress with that superior position where, you know, that could really influence the game. Now the FV4005, however, because of that alpha damage, you can effectively say, well, if this medium tank decides he's going to go for that superior position, instantly you can shut him down for the entirety of his remaining hit points, because, you know, how often is a vehicle at 100% hit points at the end of the game, unless it's like a 15-0, in which point you're probably not going to be able to win it anyway. But that's kind of where this vehicle comes in really, really well, and why I absolutely love it. Even in a scenario like this, where it's not necessarily the most engrossing game, where you can see lots of action going continuously on, but it's showcasing how even in these matchups where maybe you don't want to make any misplays, or there's a lot of unknowns at the end of the game where you're trying to get your win rate higher, or you're just trying to do the best result as possible, then not necessarily becoming the super aggressive FV4005 is the right option. Now, at this point I decide, you know what, I'm going to go after this T124, but I'm going to do something that is maybe a little less predictable. So I'm going to go over to the hill area. It's very unlikely that there's anyone going to be over on this hill area, and even if they are, I think there's only a heavy tank that hasn't been spotted. There's the two TDs that are in the known position, and you can see that there's the artillery piece, which we have to be very, very careful of when playing in this. And we go for the T124 or the Shashka, and we luckily managed to hit the Shashka, removing him from the game and making it so much easier for us to now carry, because the TD, like the Shashka, can be very deadly in terms of being able to deal super consistent damage towards you, because that vehicle is a very, very strong one. Now, because he's out of the game, we can now do a little bit more risky strategy comparatively to what maybe we did before. Now, I went to go and support that light tank that pushed into the spawn to spot. Now, we don't manage to save him, unfortunately, but because we removed the Shashka, we can now be sure that if we go up on top of this hill and then make our way down to C6 or C5, we can get behind the T124 if possible, or alternatively, if the T124 is coming up to this position, we'll be able to spot him quite easily, and since we have 1950 hit points remaining, it's not really going to be much of a problem, and so you don't really have to worry about that all too much. Now, we know that the T124 has come out, he's hit our teammate, the FV4005, and so now we have to go and we have to try and get behind this vehicle. Now, we're not going to go straight towards him, or at least directly beelining for him, because we don't know exactly where this light tank is going to be, and so I don't want to just push in willy-nilly. Now, by doing this, we can also have the potential to spot the artillery piece, because the FV doesn't have the worst vision range, and so you are able to spot people in this. I wouldn't ever rely upon it, because every single time that you spot a vehicle in this, you typically get spotted, because it is just so large and doesn't have very good concealment, and therefore, yeah, you don't really have much going for it in that regard. Now, we load a HE round, unfortunately, or a HESH round with the T124, and unfortunately we don't manage to hit him. Now, we do try and progress towards him, or at least progressing forward. Now, we get stuck on the building, which is a little bit disappointing, but he manages to miss us with that last shell. And in doing so, we're now in a position where we can potentially shoot the lower plate of the T124, and brilliant, I only managed to hit the tracks once again, dealing only 200 damage. We push forward to get behind the building to avoid the artillery shell, which you just saw came in behind us, and of course now it's time to load AP. There's no messing around in this point. And although we may have to take the T124 shot here, it's not really that big of a problem. The artillery saves us at least from being rammed, but it's unlikely that he would have been able to ram us for as much hit points as we had remaining. So, a bit of a misplay by me back there, from bouncing twice with HE, or at least HESH, and not even dealing a significant amount of damage. We also note that the artillery piece is going to be looking over here, so we don't YOLO off in or move around. We know that he's now fired, and so we are a little bit safe in going forward. I ping to my artillery to tell him, you know what, he's over here, this is where he's going to be, make sure that you are ready to cover me, and if you can do that, then that's fantastic. We take a little beeline down here. We actually spot the artillery piece, because as we said before, the vision on this isn't terrible, and that's what allows you to kind of go in. Our artillery misses, but as we're moving forward, potentially we'll be able to get into a position to hit this guy if he is deciding to kind of stay in that position down there and just spot for himself. Now, we note that he isn't actually doing that, and so we do a little bit of a quick shell you should probably never do, and we manage to hit him nonetheless, and we still have a very nice bit of a carry towards the end of the game between me, the FV4005, and that light tank, who kind of really did help out, and of course the artillery piece on our game, who came second. We came top of the game, 5 enemies taken out, 4,725 damage, 984 assistance, and a first class badge. It's really quite hard to get the mastery badge in the FV4005. You need about 8,000 damage or something like that, maybe even less currently, but yeah, really fun tank to get. And if you haven't already got one of these 103 caliber guns in terms of the FV4005 stage 2 or the FV215B183, I highly recommend you doing it. And of course, if you're watching this, you have, I believe, one more day to be able to take advantage of the premium bonus towards the FV4005, where you'll be able to play it and get it for yourself with 150% XP during any tank that you play up to this vehicle. It may even last for another week, I'm not entirely sure. We'll cover that in the update news tomorrow, so you'll be able to understand which vehicles are in the premium bonus. But regardless of that, you'll be seeing this tank in the matchup a lot more, considering people will be able to get it 50% quicker, and of course because when you're playing in these vehicles it's 50% more silver at the moment within the game. So really do implore you guys to check out the FV4005, give it a go, see what you think. Of course, let me know what you think of the FV4005 stage 2 in the comment section down below. Don't forget to check out the update news for World of Tanks this week, which is coming out tomorrow, and if you want to check out an early release of update news, then check out this video on screen on the left. And if you want to see the next gameplay and tank reviews playlist, then there is one on the right hand side, so you can see loads of different gameplays. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.